When the cinema lights went down and The Devil Wears Prada 2 started playing, I was so excited. Within the first few minutes, we saw the characters we loved so much from the first movie. The filmmakers clearly knew what they were doing. They hit us with the nostalgia, and it felt like traveling back in time to the first movie. Good, right? Well, no. After the excitement of seeing the familiar faces, the familiar office of Runway, and the glamour of it all, I started to feel like the movie was giving me a lot of things, but none of them were actually sticking. We learned that Andy has lost her job because traditional journalism is struggling, social media is changing the fashion industry, and so Runway is in trouble too. Andy is brought back to try to help turn things around. Lucy Liu makes an appearance because why not? But also Runway has a new owner who doesn't understand fashion, so there's a question of whether Runway can stay Runway or will it be stripped by a bunch of corporate suits. But also there's all these rich CEOs, and Emily is set up as an antagonist. I said that all very quickly because that's how I felt when the movie was playing. It felt like the movie was throwing events and context and conflicts at me, but none of it was really building a coherent, meaningful story. It never found the central thread that made all of those little pieces matter. And that, to me, is the real problem with The Devil Wears Prada 2. It feels like a movie that was searching for its story, but never quite finds it. I think the best way to explain why the sequel felt hollow is to compare it to the first movie. The Devil Wears Prada is a deceptively good movie. I say that because the movie presents itself initially as this flashy look inside the fashion world, where a smart but unfashionable girl gets a makeover, learns the rules of the fashion industry, and slowly proves that she belongs there. But the real power of The Devil Wears Prada is not Andy's makeover or Miranda's savage cutdowns.
I think that depends on what you're...
No. That wasn't a question.
Underneath all of that polish and snark is a clear story question. What kind of person does Andy have to become to succeed in this world? And is she willing to become that person? Every part of the movie applies pressure on that question. Every time Andy gets better at her job, she gets pulled further into Miranda's values. The better she becomes at surviving Runway, the further she gets from the girl she used to be. This is the heart of the first movie, and why it works. It's not just the great actors or the gorgeous wardrobe. Underneath all of that is a genuinely strong story about ambition, success, and identity. And that's why Andy's and Miranda's relationship captivates us. Because Miranda is not just Andy's walking HR infraction of a boss. Miranda shows Andy what it looks like to win in this world and what it costs. Andy is horrified when she realizes how Miranda betrayed Nigel to protect herself. The real climax of the movie is when Miranda tells Andy,
I see a great deal of myself in you.
And when Andy insists that she would never do what Miranda did, Miranda gives a very slight smile and says,
You already did. To Emily.
That moment lands because Miranda pierces through Andy's comforting self-image. Up until then, Andy has been able to tell herself that she is only adapting to the situation, trying to survive this impossible job. But Miranda turns the mirror back on Andy. This entire movie boils down to this single scene between Miranda and Andy, when Andy recognizes that the line she thought separated her from Miranda is much thinner than she ever wanted to believe. And this is where the sequel suffers most by comparison. In the first movie, every major plot event pushes Andy through a character journey. In The Devil Wears Prada 2, the characters are put into motion, but they feel like they're standing in place. Andy is busy trying to save Runway, but what is changing inside her? Miranda remains compelling because Meryl Streep is compelling, but the character is mostly functioning as an icon rather than as an engine for a new story. Emily is positioned as an antagonist, but it feels like she was placed there because the movie needed to find a reason to bring the character back. And this is why the sequel feels so hollow. There are characters we know and love, but the film often treats their return as the emotional payoff. It assumes that seeing them again is enough. It's not. A story needs more than just a return of the cast. It needs an actual story. So we know that they made a great movie once before. Why couldn't they just do it again? I think the answer lies in how great that first movie was. The Devil Wears Prada ends with Andy walking away. The whole movie has been building towards Andy's recognition that succeeding in Miranda's world requires a kind of self-betrayal, and in the end she makes her choice to walk away. That is a very complete ending. Andy has answered the story question. So the sequel cannot follow that narrative arc. That arc is already closed, emotionally, morally, and in terms of Andy's character development. There is no obvious what happens next built into that ending. The first movie does not leave any loose ends. And that's why it feels out of place when the sequel brings Andy back to Runway. Not just because Andy has already closed that door, but because closing that door was the whole point of her arc in the first movie. By pulling her back into Runway in the sequel, it weakens the finality of her choice in the first movie. And you might think that's not a big deal. The first movie came out 20 years ago. Why do we need a coherent storyline that follows from that? But emotionally, that's not how stories work for a lot of viewers. Once a sequel exists, it becomes part of the larger whole. They don't just continue the story, they can retrospectively shape our perception of the original story. And if the sequel is not good, it casts a shadow over the original that is very hard to ignore. And that brings us back to the bigger question. Why was this movie made? Well, it's obvious. A lot of people love the original Devil Wears Prada. There's a lot of nostalgia for it, and we wanted more. But the key question is, what do we mean when we say we want more? I completely get that desire. I was a teenager when Devil Wears Prada came out, and I watched it so many times over the years that it's embarrassing. So if you asked me earlier if I wanted more Devil Wears Prada, I would have unthinkingly said yes. But I would have been wrong. Because after watching The Devil Wears Prada 2, I realized that when I said I wanted more, I didn't actually mean I wanted the story to continue. What I wanted was more of the feeling that the first movie gave me. I wanted the comfort of returning to a movie that I loved. That isn't the same as wanting a sequel. A sequel requires a story to move forward. It needs new conflict, new character development, new emotional ground to explore. But The Devil Wears Prada did not leave us with loose ends. It left us with affection, attachment, nostalgia. And I think that is where we get confused. Nostalgia is tricky. We confuse missing something with needing more of it. Hollywood often interprets those feelings as demand for more. We miss something, so they give us more of it. We love these characters, so they bring them back. We remember the world, so they recreate it with a new coat of paint. But that is not the same as having a story. A sequel can absolutely introduce a new plot and still work. The problem with The Devil Wears Prada 2 is more specific. The first movie ended with Andy making a decisive choice to leave Runway behind. But to make the sequel happen, the story has to pull her back into the very world she has already chosen to walk away from. That is the cost of a weak sequel. It doesn't just fail to give us something new. It can also take something away from the original. And honestly, I would have preferred if this sequel had not been made. So here I am on my soapbox, saying maybe we need to learn to sit with the nostalgia, to recognize that it's beautiful that we love something, that we miss it, and that it mattered to us, without forcing it to become something more. This is a lesson that I'm learning. I love stories. I frequently wish my favorites were longer or there was more of it. But having more is not always better.